Muppet Kingdom. I believe that none of you children would have hesitated for an instant to follow the good, honest Nutcracker, who could never have meditated any evil. Maria consented to follow him, so much the more readily because she knew what claims she had upon his gratitude, and because she was convinced that he would keep his word and show her many beautiful things. "I will go with you, Master Drosselmeier," she said. "But it must not be far, and it must not be long, for as yet I have hardly had any sleep." "I will choose then," replied the Nutcracker, "the nearest, though a more difficult way." He went onward, and Maria followed him until he stopped before a large antique wardrobe, which stood in the hall. Maria perceived to her astonishment that the doors of this wardrobe, which were always kept locked, now stood wide open, so that she could see her father's fox-furred travelling coat, which hung in front. Nutcracker clambered very nimbly up by the carved figures and ornaments until he could grasp the large tassel which hung down the back of the coat and was fastened to it by a thick cord. As soon as Nutcracker pulled upon the tassel, a neat little stair of cedar wood stretched down from the sleeve of the travelling coat to the floor. "Ascend, if you please, dearest miss," cried Nutcracker. Maria did so, but scarcely had she gone up the sleeve, scarcely had she seen her way out of the collar, when a dazzling light broke forth upon her, and all at once she stood upon a sweet-smelling meadow, surrounded by millions of sparks which started up like flashing jewels. "We are now upon Candy Meadow," said Nutcracker, "but we will directly pass through yonder gate." When Maria looked up, she saw the beautiful gate, which stood a few steps before them upon the meadow. It seemed built of variegated marble, of white, brown, and raisin color, but when Maria came nearer, she perceived that the whole mass consisted of sugar, almond, and raisins, kneaded and baked together, for which reason the gate, as Nutcracker assured her when they passed through it, was called the Almond and Raisin Gate. Upon a gallery built over the gate, made apparently of barley sugar, there were 6 apes in red jackets who struck up the finest Turkish music which was ever heard, so that Maria scarcely observed that they were walking onward and onward over a rich mosaic which was nothing else than a pavement of nicely inlaid lozenges. Very soon the sweetest odors streamed around them, which were wafted from a wonderful little wood that opened on each side before them. There it shone and sparkled so among the dark leaves that the golden and silvery fruit could plainly be seen hanging from their gaily colored stems, while the trunks and branches were ornamented with ribbons and nosegays, and when the orange perfume stirred and moved like a soft breeze, how it rustled among the boughs and leaves, and the golden fruit rocked and rattled in merry music, to which the bright, dancing sparkles kept time. "Ah, how delightful it is here," cried Maria, entranced in happiness. "We are in Christmas Wood, best miss," said Nutcracker. "Ah, if I could but linger here a while," cried Maria. "Oh, it is too charming." Nutcracker clapped his hands, and some little shepherds and shepherdess and hunters and huntresses came near, who were so delicate and white that they seemed made of pure sugar. They brought a dainty little armchair all of gold, laid upon it a green cushion of candied citron, and invited Maria very politely to sit down. She did so, and immediately the shepherds and shepherdesses danced a very pretty ballet, while the hunters very obligingly blew their horns and then all disappeared again in the bushes. "Pardon, pardon, kindest Miss Stahlbaum," said Nutcracker. "The dance was miserably performed, but the people all belong to our company of wire dancers, and they can do nothing but the same thing. They are deficient in variety. And hunters blew so dull and lazy. But shall we not walk a little farther? Ah, it was all very pretty and pleased me very much," said Maria, as she rose and followed Nutcracker. They now walked along by a soft, rustling brook, out of which all the sweet perfumes seemed to arise, which filled the whole wood. "This is the Orange Brook," said Nutcracker. "But its fine perfume accepted, it cannot compare either in size or beauty with Lemonade River, which like it empties into Orgeat Lake." In fact, Maria very soon heard a louder rustling and dashing, and then beheld the broad Lemonade River, which rolled in proud cream-colored billows between banks covered with bright green bushes. A refreshing coolness arose out of its noble waves. Not far off, a dark yellow stream dragged itself lazily along, but it gave forth a very sweet odor, and a great number of little children sat on the shore, angling for little fish, which they ate up as soon as caught. When Maria came nearer, she observed that these fish were shaped almost like peanuts. At a distance, there was a very neat little village on the borders of the stream. Houses, churches, parsonages, barns were all dark brown, but many of the roofs were gilded and some of the walls were painted so strangely that it seemed as if little sugar plums and bits of citron were stuck upon them. "That is Gingerbreadville," said Nutcracker, "which lies on Molasses River. Very pretty people live in it, but they are a little ill-tempered because they suffer a good deal from the toothache, and so we will not visit it." At this moment, Maria observed a little town in which the houses were clear and transparent, and of different colors, which was a very pretty sight to look at. Nutcracker went straight forward towards it, and now Maria heard a busy, merry clatter and saw 1,000 tiny little figures collected around some heavily laden wagons which had stopped in the market. These they unloaded, and what they took out looked like sheets of colored paper and chocolate cakes. "We are in Bonbon Town," said Nutcracker. "An importation has just arrived from Paperland and from King Chocolate. The poor people of Bonbon Town are often terribly threatened by the armies of General Fly and Gnat, for which reason they fortify their houses with stout materials from Paperland and throw up fortifications of the strong bulwarks which King Chocolate sends to them. But worthiest Miss Stahlbaum, we will not visit all the little towns and villages of this land. To the capital, to the capital." Nutcracker hastened forward, and Maria followed, full of curiosity. It was not long before a sweet odor of roses enveloped them, and everything around was touched with a soft rose-colored tint. Maria soon observed that this was the reflection of the red, glancing lake, which rustled and danced before them, with charming and melodious tones and little rosy waves. Beautiful silver-white swans with golden colors swam over the lake singing sweet tunes, while little diamond fish dipped up and down in the rosy water, as if in the merriest dance. "Oh!" exclaimed Marie ardently. "This is then the lake which Godfather Drosselmeier was once going to make for me, and I myself am the maiden who is to fondle and caress the dear swans." Nutcracker laughed in a scornful manner such as Marie had never observed in him before, and then said, "Godfather Drosselmeier can never make anything like this. You yourself rather, sweetest Miss Stahlbaum. But we will not trouble our heads about that. Let us sail across the Rose Lake to the capital." The capital. Nutcracker clapped his little hands together again. When the Rose Lake began to dash louder, the waves rolled higher, and Maria perceived a car of shells covered with bright, sparkling, gay-colored jewels moving toward them in the distance, drawn by 2 golden-scaled dolphins. 12 of the loveliest little people, with caps and aprons braided of hummingbirds' feathers, leapt upon the shore and carried first Maria and then Nutcracker with a soft, gliding step over the waves, and placed them in the car, which straightway began to move across the lake. How delightful it was as Maria sailed along with the rosy air and the rosy waves breathing and dashing around her. The 2 golden-scaled dolphins raised up their heads and spouted clear crystal streams out of their nostrils, high, high in the air, which fell down again in 1,000 quivering, flashing rainbows, and it seemed as if 2 small silver voices sang out, "Who sails upon the rosy lake? The little fairy, awake, awake. Music and song, bim, bim. Fishes, sim, sim. Swans, tweet, tweet. Birds, whiz, whiz. Breezes, rustling, ringing, singing, blowing. A fairy over the waves is going. Rosy billows, murmuring, playing, dashing, cooling the air. Roll along, along." But the singing of the falling fountains did not seem to please the 12 little people who were seated up behind the car, for they shook their parasols so hard that the palm leaves of which they were made rattled and clattered, and they stamped with their feet in very strange time and sang clap and clip and clip and clap, backward and forward, up and down. "They are merry folk," said Nutcracker, somewhat disturbed, "but they will make the whole lake rebellious." And very soon there arose a confused din of strange voices which seemed to float in the sea and in the air, but Maria did not heed them, for she was gazing in the sweet-scented rosy waves, out of which the face of a charming little maiden smiled up upon her. "Oh!" she cried joyfully, and struck her hands together. "Look, look, dear Master Drosselmeier, there's the Princess Pirlipat down in the water. Oh, how sweetly she smiles upon me." Nutcracker sighed quite sorrowfully and said, "Oh, kindest Miss Stahlbaum, that is not the Princess Pirlipat. It is you. It is your own lovely face that smiles so sweetly out of the Rose Lake." Upon this, Maria drew her head back very quickly, put her hands before her face, and blushed very much. At this moment, she was lifted out of the car by the 12 little people and carried on to the shore. They now found themselves in a little thicket, which was perhaps more beautiful even than the Christmas wood. It was so bright and sparkling. What was most wonderful in it were the strange fruit that hung upon the trees, which were not only curiously colored, but gave out also every kind of sweet odor. "We are in Sweetmeat Grove," said Nutcracker, "but yonder is the capital. And what a sight! How can I venture, children, to describe the beauty and splendor of the city which now displayed itself to Maria's eyes upon the broad, flowery meadow before them? Not only did the walls and towers glitter with the gayest colors, but the style of the buildings was like nothing else that is to be found in the world. Instead of roofs, the houses had diadems set upon them, braided and twisted in the daintiest manner, and the towers were crowned with variegated trellis work and hung with festoons the most beautiful that ever were seen. As they passed through the gate, which looked as if it were built of macaroons and candied fruits, silver soldiers presented arms, and a little man in a brocade dressing gown threw himself upon Nutcracker's neck with the words, "Welcome, best prince, welcome to Confectionville." Maria was not a little astonished to hear young Drosselmeyer called a prince by such a distinguished man. But she now heard such a hubbub of little voices, such a huzzaing and laughter, such a singing and playing, that she could think of nothing else, and turned to Nutcracker to ask him what all that meant. "Oh, worthiest Miss Stahlbaum, it is nothing uncommon. Confectionville is a populous and merry city. Thus it goes here every day. Let us walk farther, if you please." They had only gone a few steps when they came to the great marketplace, which presented a wonderful sight. All the houses around were of sugared filigree work. Gallery was built over gallery, and in the middle stood a tall obelisk of white and red sugared cream, while 4 curious sweet fountains played in the air of orgeat, lemonade, mead, and sweet soda, and in the great basin were soft bruised fruits mixed with sugar and cream and touched a little by the frost. But prettier than all this were the charming little people who, by thousands, pushed and squeezed, knocked their heads together, huzzaed, laughed, jested, and sang, who had raised indeed that merry din which Maria had heard at a distance. Here were beautifully dressed men and women, Americans and Greeks, Tyrolese, officers and soldiers, and harlequins, in short, all the people that can possibly be found in the world. On one corner the tumult increased. The people rocked and reeled to clear the way, for just at that moment the Grand Mogul was carried by in a palanquin, attended by 93 of his kingdom. Now, on the opposite corner, the fishermen, 500 strong, were marching in procession, and it happened, very unfortunately, that the Grand Turk took it into his head just then to ride over the marketplace with 3,000 Janissaries, besides which a loner train came from the festival of sacrifices, with sounding music, singing "Up and thank the mighty sun," and pushed straight on for the obelisk. Then, what a squeezing and a pushing and a rattling and a clattering! By and by a screaming was heard, for a fisherman had knocked off a Brahmin's head in the crowd, and the great Mogul was almost run over by a harlequin. The tumult grew wilder and wilder. They had commenced to beat and strike each other, when the man in the brocade dressing gown who had called Nutcracker a prince at the gate clambered up by the obelisk and, having thrice pulled the little bell, called out 3 times, "Confiseur! Confiseur! Confiseur!" The tumult was immediately appeased. Each one tried to help himself as well as he could, and after the confused trains and processions were set in order, and the dirt upon the great Mogul's clothes was brushed off, and the Brahmin's head put on again, the former hubbub began anew. "What do they mean by confiseur, good Master Drosselmeier?" asked Marie. "Ah, best Miss Stahlbaum," replied Nutcracker. "By confiseur is meant an unknown but very fearful power which they believe can do with them as he pleases. It is the fate that rules over the merry little people, and they fear it so much that the mere mention of the name is able to still the greatest tumult. Each one then thinks no longer of anything earthly, of cuffs and kicks and broken heads, but retires within himself and says, 'What are we, and what is our destiny?'" Maria could not refrain from a loud exclamation of surprise and wonder, as all at once they stood before a castle glimmering with rosy light and crowned with 100 airy towers. Beautiful nosegays of violets, narcissus, tulips, and dahlias were hung about the walls, and their dark, glowing colors only heightened the dazzling rose-tinted white ground upon which they were fastened. The large cupola of the center building and the sloping roofs of the towers were spangled with 1,000 gold and silver stars. "We are now in front of Marzipan Castle," said Nutcracker. Maria was completely lost in admiration of this magic palace. Yet it did not escape her that one of the large towers was without a roof, while little men were moving around it upon a scaffolding of cinnamon, as if busied in repairing it. But before she had time to inquire about it, Nutcracker continued, "Not long ago this beautiful castle was threatened with serious injury, if not with entire destruction. The giant Sweet Tooth came this way and bit off the roof of yonder tower and was gnawing upon the great cupola when the people of Confectionville gave up to him a full quarter of the city and a considerable portion of Sweetmeat Grove as tribute, with which he contented himself and went his way. At this moment, soft music was heard. The doors of the palace opened, and 12 little pages marched out with lighted cloths, which they carried in their hands like torches. Each of their heads was a pearl, their bodies were made of rubies and emeralds, and they walked upon feet cast out of pure gold. 4 ladies followed them, almost as tall as Maria's Clara, but so richly and splendidly dressed that she saw in a moment that they were princesses born. They embraced Nutcracker in the tenderest manner and cried with joyful sobs, "Oh, my prince, my best prince, oh, my brother." Nutcracker seemed very much moved. He wiped the tears out of his eyes, then took Maria by the hand and said with great emotion, "This is Miss Maria Stahlbaum, the daughter of a much respected and very worthy physician, and she is the preserver of my life. Had she not thrown her shoe at the right time, had she not supplied me with the sword of a pensioned colonel, I should now be lying in my grave, torn and bitten to pieces by the terrible Mouse King. View her, gaze upon her, and tell me if Pirlipat, although a princess by birth, can compare with her in beauty, goodness, and virtue. No, I say no. And all the ladies cried out, No, and then fell upon Maria's neck, exclaiming, Ah, dear preserver of the prince, our beloved brother, charming Miss Maria Stahlbaum. She now accompanied these ladies and Nutcracker into the castle and entered a room, the walls of which were of bright colored crystal. But of all the beautiful things which Maria saw there, what pleased her most was the nice little chairs, sofas, secretaries, and bureaus, with which the room was furnished, and which were all made of cedar or Brazil wood, and ornamented with golden flowers. The princesses made Maria and Nutcracker sit down, and said that they would immediately prepare something for them to eat. They then brought out a great many little cups and saucers and plates and dishes, all of the finest porcelain, and spoons, knives and forks, graters, kettles, pans, and other kitchen furniture, all of gold and silver. Then they brought the finest fruits and sugar things such as Maria had never seen before, and began in the nicest manner to squeeze the fruits with their little snow-white hands, and to pound the spice and grate the sugar almonds. In short, so to turn and handle everything that Maria could see how well the princesses had been brought up, and what a delicious meal they were preparing. As she desired very much to learn such things, she could not help wishing to herself that she might assist the princesses in their labor. The most beautiful of Nutcracker's sisters, as if she had guessed Maria's secret thoughts, reached her a little golden mortar, saying, "Oh, sweet friend, dear preserver of my brother, will you not pound a little of this sugar candy?" While Maria pounded in the mortar, Nutcracker began to give a full account of his adventures, of the dreadful battle between his army and that of the Mouse King, and how he had lost it by the cowardice of his troops, how the terrible Mouse King lay in wait to bite him in pieces, and how Maria, to preserve him, gave up many of his subjects who had entered her service, and all just as it had happened. During this narration, it seemed to Maria as if his words became less and less audible, and the pounding of her mortar also sounded more and more distant, until she could scarcely hear it. Presently, she saw a silver gauze before her, in which the princesses, the pages, Nutcracker, and herself too were all enveloped. A singular humming and rustling and singing was heard, which seemed to die away in the distance. And now Maria was raised up, as if upon mounting waves, higher and higher, higher and higher, higher and higher. The conclusion. Prrr, poof, it went. Maria fell down from an immeasurable height. That was a fall. But she opened her eyes, and there she lay upon her little bed. It was bright day, and her mother stood by her, saying, "How can you sleep so long? Breakfast has been ready this great while." You now perceive, kind readers and listeners, that Maria, completely confused by the wonderful things which she had seen, had at last fallen asleep in the room at Marzipan Castle, and that the people, or the pages, or perhaps even the princesses themselves must have carried her home and laid her softly in bed. "Oh, mother! Dear mother, you cannot think where young Master Drosselmeyer led me last night, and what beautiful things I have seen." And then she began and told the whole, almost as accurately as I have related it, while her mother listened in astonishment. When she had finished, her mother said, "You have had a long and very beautiful dream, but now drive it all out of your head." Maria insisted upon it that she had not dreamed, but had actually seen what she had related. When her mother led her into the sitting room to the glass case, took Nutcracker out, who was standing as usual upon the second shelf, and said, "Silly child, how can you believe that this wooden Nuremberg puppet can have life or motion?" "But, dear mother," replied Maria, "I know little Nutcracker is young Master Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, Godfather Drosselmeyer's nephew." Then her father and mother both laughed very heartily. "Oh, dear father," said Maria, almost crying, "you should not laugh so at my Nutcracker. He has spoken very well of you, for when we entered Marzipan Castle and he presented me to his sisters, the princesses, he said that you were a much respected and very worthy physician." At this, the laughter was still louder, and Louisa and even Fred joined in. Maria then ran into the other chamber, took the 7 crowns of the Mouse King out of her little box, brought them in and handed them to her mother, saying, "See here, dear mother, here are the 7 crowns of the Mouse King, which young Master Drosselmeyer gave me last night, as a token of his victory." Her mother examined the little crowns in great astonishment. They were made of a strange but very shining metal, and were so delicately worked that it seemed impossible that mortal hands could have formed them. Her father likewise could not gaze enough at them, and he insisted very seriously that Maria should confess how she obtained them, but she could give no other account of them, and kept firm to what she had said. And as her father spoke very harshly to her and even called her a little storyteller, she began to cry bitterly and said, "Oh, what then shall I say?" At this moment the door opened. The counselor entered and exclaimed, "What's this? What's this?" The doctor told him of all that had happened and showed him the little crowns. As soon as the counselor cast his eyes on them, he laughed and cried, "Stupid pack, stupid pack! These are the very crowns which I used to wear on my watch chain years ago, and which I gave to little Maria on her birthday when she was 2 years old. Don't you remember?" Neither father nor mother could remember them, but when Maria saw that her parents had forgotten their anger, she ran to Godfather Drosselmeyer and said, "Oh, you know all about it, Godfather Drosselmeyer. Tell them yourself that my Nutcracker is your nephew, young Master Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, that it was he who gave me the crowns." The counselor's face turned very dark and grave, and he muttered, "Stupid pack, stupid pack." Upon this, the doctor took little Maria upon his knee and said very seriously, "Listen to me, Maria. Once for all, drive your foolish dreams and nonsense out of your head. If I ever hear you say again that the silly, ugly Nutcracker is the nephew of your godfather Drosselmeyer, I will throw him out of the window, and all the rest of your puppets, Miss Clara not excepted." Poor Maria durst not now speak of all these wonders, but she thought so much the more. Her whole soul was full of them. For you may imagine that things so fine and beautiful as those which she had seen are not easily forgotten. Even Fred turned his back upon his sister whenever she spoke of the wonderful kingdom in which she had been so happy, and it is said that he sometimes would mutter between his teeth, "Silly goose." But that I can hardly believe of so amiable and good-natured a fellow. This is certain, however, he no longer believed a word of what Maria had told him. He made a formal apology to his hussars on public parade for the injustice which he had done them, stuck to their caps feathers of goose quill, much finer and taller than those of which they had been deprived, and permitted them again to blow the hussars' grand march. We know best how it stood with their courage when those hateful balls spotted their coats. Maria was not allowed then to speak any more of her adventure, but the images of that wonderful fairy kingdom played about her in sweet, rustling tones. She could bring them all back again whenever she fixed her thoughts steadfastly upon them. And hence it came that, instead of playing as she formerly did, she would sit silent and thoughtful, musing within herself, for which reason the rest would often scold her and call her a little dreamer. Some time after this, it happened that the counselor was busy repairing a clock in Dr. Stahlbaum's house. Maria sat close by the glass case and, lost in her dreams, was gazing at Nutcracker, when the words broke from her lips involuntarily. Dear Master Drosselmeier, if you actually were living, I would not behave like Princess Pirlipat and slight you because for my sake you had ceased to be a handsome young man. At this, the counselor screamed, "Hey, hey, stupid pack!" Then there was a clap and a knock so loud that Maria sank from her chair in a swoon. When she came to herself, her mother was busied about her and said, "How came such a great girl to fall from her chair?" "He is Godfather Drosselmeier's nephew, just arrived from Nuremberg. Come, behave like a little woman." She looked up. The counselor had put on his glass wig again and his brown coat. He was smiling very pleasantly, and he held by the hand a little but very well-shaped young man. His face was as white as milk and as red as blood. He wore a handsome red coat trimmed with gold, and shoes and white silk stockings. In his buttonhole was stuck a nosegay. His hair was nicely powdered and curled, and down his back there hung a magnificent queue. The sword by his side seemed to be made of nothing but jewels. It flashed and sparkled so brightly, and the little hat which he carried under his arm looked as if it were overlaid with soft silken flakes. It very soon appeared how polite and well-bred the young man was, for he had brought Maria a great many handsome playthings, the nicest gingerbread, and the same sugar figures which the Mouse King had bitten to pieces. And for Fred he had brought a splendid saber. At table the little fellow cracked nuts for the whole company. The hardest could not resist him. With the right hand he put them in his mouth. With the left he pulled hard upon his queue, and crack! The nut fell in pieces. Maria had turned very red when she first saw the handsome young man, and she became still redder when, after dinner, young Drosselmeier invited her to go with him into the sitting-room to the glass case. "Play pretty together, children. I have nothing against it, since all my clocks are going," cried the counselor. Scarcely was Maria alone with young Drosselmeier when he stooped upon one knee and said, "Oh, my very best Miss Stahlbaum, you see here, at your feet, the happy Drosselmeier, whose life you saved on this very spot. You said most amiably that you would not slight me like the hateful Princess Pirlipat if I had become ugly for your sake. From that moment I ceased to be a miserable Nutcracker, and resumed again my old and, I hope, not disagreeable figure. Oh, excellent Miss Stahlbaum, make me happy with your dear hand. Share with me crown and kingdom. rule with me in Marzipan Castle, for there I am still king." Maria raised the youth and said softly, "Dear Master Drosselmeyer, you are a kind, good-natured young man, and since you rule in such a charming land among such pretty, merry people, I will be your bride." With this, Maria immediately became Drosselmeyer's betrothed bride. After a year and a day he came, as I have heard, and carried her away in a golden chariot, drawn by silver horses. There danced at the wedding 22,000 of the most splendid figures, adorned with pearls and diamonds, and Maria, it is said, is at this hour queen of a land where sparkling Christmas woods, transparent marzipan castles, in short, where the most beautiful, the most wonderful things can be seen by those who will only have eyes for them. The end.